Hello and welcome back to another video. In this video, we are going to record a macro in Microsoft Excel using VBA and then modify it to make it dynamic along with input box. So let's get started. I have this Excel file open here called sample data.xlsm. If you do not have it saved as XLSM, you can save it as XLSM or put this macro in your personal macro workbook. Either way it works. So the file I have has some sample customer information with dates, region, item information, etc. So let's record a simple macro. We go to Developer tab and we click on Record Macro, and this will ask you where you want to record it. You can either record this macro in the personal macro workbook or this workbook. So we already have the file as an XLSM, so let's save the macro in this workbook. Click on OK. You can add a name here as well. So let's say filter contains, because that is what we are going to record in this macro. So I'm going to filter on the item, and I am going to say in text filters, I'm going to go to contains and then type pen here. And this will filter all those rows where it has pen in it. So it could be pen, pencil, pen set, etc. I'm going to click on stop recording. Now let's go to our developer tab, Alt F11 to access the Visual Basic screen. In modules, I'm going to double click to access this module 1, and we have our macro recorded. Okay, so let's start modifying this. I'm just going to remove these two lines. These are extra, we don't really need them. Okay, so we can modify a couple of things here. So first thing we see is that the range it has is A1 through G44, which right now would work, but in future, if you have more data in this will stop to work. So we need to make this dynamic. So this is adjustment 1 to convert this to dynamic range. Next thing we can do is we can make this criteria dynamic. So we can tell VBA to ask us each time what we want to filter. So we are going to make this dynamic. Another thing we can do is we can make the field dynamic as well. So it's possible that sometimes your item column could be at some different place. So we can make this dynamic as well. So let's start doing that. So I'm just going to remove this. These are comments, we don't really need them. So I'm going to say dim LR as integer. LR stands for last row. So we can say range and .excel down .row. Keep in mind that there are multiple ways to calculate the last row. I normally use this one. It will continue to work as long as your data does not have any disconnect in column A. So for example, let's say if something is missing here, I'm just gonna remove this, make this to blank. This method will stop to work and we will need to look into other methods. You can come from bottom up as well, which normally works in cases where you have missing information between the rows. Let's go back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the 44 here, add an ampersand here, and I'm going to add LR here. So this is the first adjustment. Let's run the macro again just to see if our code still works. Run this, and you can see it still works. That means the adjustment we made here, this is working. I'm going to remove the filter. So the next thing we can do is we can add an input box here, which will save the input value from the user, and then it will put into the criteria here. So let's do that. So the VB input box is very simple. We can just say dim iBox as, we call it string because we are going to save string in there. iBox will store the value of input. So we'll put iBox equals to input box. If you want this to autocomplete, you can just press Ctrl Enter, open the parentheses, and this will give you a bunch of parameters. So you can add a prompt here. Anything you put in the prompt will actually display in the input box that the user sees. Then you have title, default, there is a square bracket around them, which means that they're not mandatory and you can skip them. So let's add a value here. What do you want to filter? Put the value, the string, close this, and this is our input box. So let's copy this, and we need to make this dynamic. So what we're gonna do is we will need to separate these. So we separate this block, and then we add an ampersand here instead of pen. We are going to add iBox here. Then we add another ampersand, and then we add this. All right, so far so good. Let's test if this still works, just to make sure that the macro we are writing is correct. I'm just gonna sort this a bit. You can actually add this in a new line as well. So this is a bit easier to see. Okay, let's run the macro, and it will ask us what do you want to filter, and then we type our value. So let's say this time we say DER. So this should basically filter binder here. Okay. That is great. We are able to dynamically filter our values using input box. This is great. Okay, so let me clear the filter, and I'm just going to add another column here. This is a temporary column, just to see if our macro still works if we add a new column. Let's just say x1, and I'm going to say x, copy it, paste it down, And now let's try running our macro again, and this time I believe the macro will not run because the field 4 is hard coded right now. So let's run it. Let's add pen here, and yeah, our macro does not work because it's now trying to filter x1, which is the 4th column. So let me stop the macro. Let me clear the filter. And what we will need to do right now is we will need to somehow figure out the column number as well. So we can do that using application.worksheet_function.match, which is the match function of Excel. That will store the column value. So let's say item call as integer, because this will be a numeric value. Column number of item column, right? So let's add it here. Period equals to application. So anytime you want to use any Excel function within the VBA, you can just add application.worksheet function, and now you have access to all the Excel functions. So let's type match. So the match function will work in a similar way it does in Excel. So we have 3 arguments here. First is the value that you want to find. The value we want to find will be item. Then you will give it where to find it. And the last argument, as always, will be true or false, or exact match or approximate match. So let's put the value item here. So the second argument is where do you want to find it? We want to find it in row 1. So we will say rows 1 through 1. So this will now look for item in rows 1 through 1. And the last argument is true or false, or approximate or exact match. We want exact match, so we type 0 for exact match and close this. Step into the code and see what the item column stores right now. Okay, you can see the values that are being stored in the locals window. So you can see the item underscore call variable has 5 stored in it because it's the 5th column number, which is correct. So if we replace 4 with item call, our macro should work. So let's stop the macro, and I'm just gonna remove 4 here and add item call. And now if we run the macro again, our macro should continue to run. So add pen here, and boom, our macro still runs. Now just to make sure that our macro is fully dynamic, I'm just gonna remove this column here, remove the filter here, and test it one more time to see if our macro still works. So now I'm gonna add der. This should filter binder here, and yeah, this continues to work. So this is how you can record a VBA macro. You do not have to write all of this yourself, and then you can just learn on how to make this dynamic, and that's it. I hope you liked the video. If you did, consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next video.